What does the future of work look like? Offices around the world are reorganizing themselves, but not everyone wishes to return to fixed workplaces once the pandemic allows it. Some have acquired a taste for working from home. Others still miss the physical divide between the job and home life. And employers have mixed opinions too. Many want to support allowing employees the freedom to decide when and where they work. For others, this freedom is actually the start of a free fall into chaos. Welcome to your COVID-19 Special. I'm Chris Kober in Berlin. In March 2020, many companies didn't have a choice. The raging coronavirus pandemic forced governments to enact strict social distancing rules. Overnight, many offices were shut and companies started a huge remote working experiment. Now that vaccine drives have been underway, at least in industrialized nations and emerging economies, how much of remote working is here to stay?
All he needs are a computer and an internet connection. Carlo Almendral doesn't need an office. Like many other Filipinos, he escaped the lockdown in the capital, Manila, to work remotely on the beach.
I didn't realize how stressed out and anxious I was about the pandemic until I got here and started walking around on the beach with a mask on and realized that nobody else is kind of doing it.
Many have discovered the digital nomad lifestyle, and it's hard for them to go back. Some have let go of desk work completely, preferring a much more untethered model. Welsh call center consultant Jason Griffin wants to show the world that work can be performed from literally anywhere at all, provided there's enough battery power. It's a message he wants to share widely.
The traditional 5 days in the office, Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, they're gone. They're not here anymore. People are going to be split between home and office, if not home all the time. And it's exciting because it fits people's life so much better. Everything's going to be better.
But the problem is, not everyone may be on board.
The big problem that the major players have is that they believe that their best work can be done when the people are bundled together in the one office, so to speak. So there's going to be a little bit of a tension there.
And tensions can rise too when one is forced to work from home and care for children stuck there too. The Yap family in Taiwan knows all too well. Having to concentrate on the job and household chores while keeping children engaged is a challenge.
I'm so bored. Online learning is doing all the things I did at school at home. I feel lazy because there's no one to push me.
But once it's safe to leave home, will offices ever be full again? In Germany, a minority can imagine working exclusively from home. Over 30% only want to work in the office. But a significant majority prefers a mix of office life and telecommuting. For now, who gets which model will differ from person to person, and what their bosses say.
Let's get more on this from Sharon Parker. She's the director of the Center for Transformative Work Design at Curtin University's Future of Work Institute in Perth, Australia. Welcome to DW, Sharon. In the early days of the pandemic, you co-authored a research paper, and in it you outlined 4 key challenges to people working remotely: work-home interference, ineffective communication, procrastination, and loneliness. Have these improved throughout the last months?
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, great question. And I guess the answer to that is they've improved for some people, but not necessarily all people. And that's, I guess, one of the important things about remote work during this time, that people have had very different experiences. And, you know this from dinner party conversations and so on. If you're someone who's at home in a small apartment and you've got young children and, you haven't got your own workspace and so on, then those challenges that you mentioned, can be really huge and daunting. But for other people who haven't had perhaps the same situations, they've loved working from home and thrived on it, and actually, are talking about wanting to have more working from home into the future. So people's experience have been very diverse, but absolutely some people have experienced those challenges that you mentioned.
Right. I mean, despite these diverse experiences, a Microsoft report found that almost 80% of those surveyed said they would like to continue working from home, at least to some degree, after the pandemic. Is that likely to happen?
Yeah, and actually our own research suggested very similar numbers of people. Is it likely to happen? Actually, interestingly, here in Perth is a bit of a test case because, as I mentioned, we've been out of lockdown for about a year. We are definitely seeing more hybrid models of work because I guess a few things have happened. Workers have discovered, some of them, that this is something they want to continue. They've built new skills, they've become more confident. Technology has advanced during this time. Actually, the technology is much, much better for this sort of conversation that we're having right now. And also companies have learned that they can trust people, that they can still have productivity. And so they've also learned they could save some office costs. So there's been a lot of forces coming together to suggest that we won't probably go back to how it was before.
Okay.
Exactly what it will look like, it's still uncertain. But I think there's going to be a lot more hybrid working around into the future.
Now, speaking of technology, I mean, there is a large chunk of people that say they feel overworked, they feel exhausted, partly because of a dramatic increase in digital collaboration, including emails, meetings, remote meetings, chats, groups working together on documents. If remote working is here to stay, what does a redesign look like?
Well, we need to, whether people are remote working or whether people are working in the office, we need to give attention to these aspects of work that we know from decades of research affect people psychologically. And you mentioned their workload. So one of the things we've seen during COVID, when people are working from home a lot, even simple things like the fact that people don't have to commute, sometimes people spend that time just working more, and then you've got some of those challenges of things like constant Zoom meetings and back-to-back Zoom meetings, and it's very fatiguing, it's very tiring, and research shows that it's more tiring than those face-to-face conversations for all sorts of reasons. So, what going into the future, we're going to have to pay serious attention to that and say, okay, how do we make sure that those workloads are manageable, that people are switching off, that we are giving people proper breaks between meetings and so on. And that's this topic of work redesign, and it's been important for a long time in work in the office, and it's going to become a more important topic for working from home into the future as well.
Let me ask you, is all of this a debate in very rich countries? How much working from home is possible in regions where technological standards are much lower?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. In a sense, we've got a privileged position compared to some countries, but also some jobs. Not all jobs can be done from home, as we know, and we've talked a lot about essential workers and the pressures that they've been under during this COVID. And I have to say, in the early days, we spent a lot of time of the pandemic saying, well, actually, we're lucky. We're sort of talking about these struggles of remote working, but actually we've got a job, we've got a job that can be done at home, and we've got health and all those other things. So sometimes you do have to put these things in perspective. But I think the most important point is that whether you work from home, whether you work in the office, there's things that you can do to make work better. And that's what we've got to focus on. Teach our managers, educate our managers and others to create work in which people, have got reasonable workloads, have got some autonomy, and do those things that we know really enable people to thrive and flourish in their work.
Sharon Parker of Curtin University in Perth, Australia, thank you for your insights. Whether we like it or not, working from home has kept many of us out of crowded subways or buses during our commute and away from potentially infectious office meetings, thereby lowering the risk of catching the coronavirus. But we have to leave the house at some point, right? And how protected are we then? Here's one of your questions to our science correspondent, Derek Williams.
How likely are you to catch COVID-19 outside, for example, from someone running by?
For me, one of the most striking aspects of this pandemic is the amount of research that's gone into trying to answer seemingly simple questions like this, which turn out to actually be pretty incredibly complex. I mean, who would have guessed even a year ago that we'd have gotten so obsessed with the highly abstract world of aerosol distribution physics, both in enclosed rooms and outside? Back to the question though, we now know that while it certainly might be possible to catch COVID-19 outdoors, it's much, much less likely than it is indoors in poorly ventilated spaces where people spend extended periods of time. That's because, unlike outdoors, aerosols accumulate in enclosed spaces and increase the chance that you might inhale enough of what an infected person has exhaled to catch the disease. Though that's an amount, I'd like to note, by the way, that we still don't know with any certainty. In general, the consensus seems to be that in addition to the indoors-outdoors aspect of the equation, the other factors that play major roles in infection are how long exposure lasts, how close an infected person comes to you, and the amount of time that you're around them. The WHO only recommends masks in outdoor settings where physical distancing can't be maintained, like crowds, and not for people doing intense physical activity. That's because pretty much all the indicators point to the conclusion that the jogger panting by you in the park just doesn't really present that big of a risk.